Hey guys, welcome back. So today, working on this Troy-Bilt Snowblower. This one was given to me for free by a friend, and he actually got it from one of his friends. It is in non-running condition, and his intention was to fix it. You know, he started taking it apart and got to this point right here and kind of threw up his hands and offered it to me. So, he believes it just needs a carb clean and a new coil. He also included a box of parts, which has the said coil in question. So before going too far on this and ordering any parts, I do want to get this coil on, see if we in fact do not have spark, and potentially I might have another one that I could throw in there just to get the engine running. It may not be the right one, but I want to see what the engine sounds like, see what works and doesn't work, and kind of write up a list from there. Anyway, this seems to be a very good snowblower. It has a lot of features, including the heated grips. We got these triggers here that release the drive on each wheel, so you can turn it real easy. Of course, we have the normal controls right there, and we have an electric start, 10 horse Tecumseh engine, and 2 lights. So it's a pretty decent machine, and I would say worth saving. Anyway, as you can tell, there is a bunch of rust. Thankfully, I don't think we have any rot yet. And despite the rust, I would say this has not seen a lot of use. The metal looks to be very straight. The auger is in good condition as well. Nothing is bent. So I'm hoping it's not going to need a whole lot. So let me set up a little bit better. We'll get this coil back on the engine, spin it over, and see if we have any spark. I guess even before swapping out that coil, let's just check the oil situation. Yeah, there is some oil in there. I thought initially that was the color of the oil, but it just seems to be stained. So let's see, we seem to be perfect as far as the oil level goes. We'll just start by getting these studs out. And before I put the coil back on, I'm going to sand this magnet right here. Now, the rust is not going to impact the quality of spark, but if you have too much rust, when you set the gap, you won't be able to set the gap correctly. So we'll just smooth that out first before putting that coil back on here. Actually, I think those are needed. They are extensions so that the coil's in the right spot. So we'll just put those back and check the box. Hopefully he included the bolts that are supposed to go in there. Found these in the box. They seem to be the right ones. So the business card is going to provide about a 10 thousandths gap. And by loosening those bolts with the magnet underneath, the coil gets pulled down. And now we should have the proper gap. So we just snug those up. And get the business card back, if I can. And I'm just going to pull the spark plug real quick. We'll spin the engine, make sure that this coil isn't rubbing anywhere on the flywheel. Someone was definitely chasing spark. This plug, never been used. It's a Champion J19LM. Anyway, let's just rotate this. And there's a fair amount of resistance, so the belt might have been kind of stuck on the pulley. Looks like we're good. So I'm going to get a spark tester on this. We'll get the drill on here. Just spin it. See what we get. So we'll start simple here. Just use this tester that lights up if we have spark. So we'll rest the plug there to get a good ground. The kill wire is not on the coil. So when I spin the engine, there's nothing grounding that coil out. If it's good, we should have spark. I'm going to use this to spin the engine over, and the important piece here is this. This is an adapter to convert a breaker bar into a ratchet. So you can adjust the direction that it spins, whether you're tightening or loosening. In our case, I want it set so that I can spin the engine clockwise, and then when I let go of the trigger, the brake in the drill turns on, which it can't stop the flywheel. There's too much mass there, and it's just going to destroy the drill. So this will allow this to continue to spin without damaging the gearbox. And we get absolutely nothing. No signs of spark. So I guess to be fair, this is touching the muffler. So let me reposition that and try it one more time. And still we get nothing. So I would say we do have a bad coil here. Really, the only other thing we could check is that the ignition coil is making a good ground connection to the body of the engine. If there's too much rust in between and there's not a good connection, we're also going to lose spark. So I guess an easy way to test that is just with a multimeter set to test continuity. And if you put one lead on the engine ground and you take the other lead and touch it to a clean piece of metal on the ignition coil, we should hear a beep. And we do. So we have a good connection from the coil to the engine block. So yeah, I would say that is a bad coil. Anyway, I do have a couple other coils. They are for, I think, 9 or maybe 10 horse Tecumseh engines for generators. I'm sure it's not the right part, but potentially it'll work good enough. So let me get those out, see if they have any chance. So I've got 2 coils for a Tecumseh engine here. Again, probably not the right part. Whether it cross-references to this engine, I don't know. But if the flywheel's the same size and the bolt pattern's the same, then these should work. So I'm going to get the bad coil off. We'll just hold these others up in its place, see if they're going to work. Yeah, that one has a chance. This one is the clone. Now, it's not labeled which side is cylinder and which side is out, but usually the kill wire tab is on the inside, so we'll give that a try. If it's backwards, the timing's going to be off. It could backfire and kick back, or just have no spark at all. All right, let's gap this one and see what we get. Nice. We've got spark. Things are looking pretty good. We now have spark. You know, compression, I can tell we have it. Fuel, that's almost always an issue. That said, I did take a peek in the tank, and there is fuel in there. You know, it doesn't smell bad, and I would say there is a chance that it might run as is. So I'm going to get the plug back in the engine. We'll use the electric start to turn it over and see if we get any signs of life. Now for now, I'm just going to rig up a wire on the ignition coil. So if it does run, we can use this to ground out and kill spark. You know, as far as the wire that's supposed to be there, you know, I'm not 100% sure it's connected properly on both sides, so I don't want any surprises. The throttle control is also kind of free floating here, and that is part of the governor system. So I'm going to use a zip tie and just make sure that throttle stays in the idle position for this test. So we'll start just by zip tying this throttle plate. This is the idle set screw, so right now it's actually in the idle position, and I want to make sure it stays there. So if I add a zip tie like this, and hopefully it fits, but the idea is I can attach it to this chute adjustment right here and hold that throttle in place. Now, the governor rods, they are connected to the governor arm. So the internal governor is still connected, and the job of the internal governor is to slow the engine down if it over revs. This piece right here should have a spring with adjustable tension, and I'm not actually seeing that spring, so I don't think we'd be able to get this engine off of idle anyway. So this piece also needs to be secured just kind of out of the way. So I'm going to add a zip tie right here to keep it away from the flywheel. That should be fine. I think we're ready for contact. So plug this in to 120 volts. That'll crank the engine when we press and hold that button. There is a choke here, so I'm going to turn the choke on and we'll try to crank it. That is a fast electric start, but we're not starting. So let's open the choke and let's double check the fuel valve. Actually, the valve is off. And now it's on, I think. So let's just try it again. Right now the choke is off. Nothing. Choke on. and absolutely nothing. So let's try a bit of starting fluid and do this again. Very nice. Kind of surprised. It ran on its own, and not only that, it ran pretty well. I could turn the choke off, throttle the engine up, and things sounded good. So if we weren't in like we are now, I would just say send it. It's running pretty well, but since we have the access we do, and I'm sure this carb has never been cleaned, I think we should pull it, clean it up, and that'll also give us a chance to drain out the tank and most likely replace that fuel line. Well, this one's already earned its oil change, so let's get it changed now while the engine's hot. Maybe. It's probably been a while. Pretty clean, actually. I'd say we have a healthy engine based on the oil. We don't have any metallic in there. There's no shiny bits. So that is a good sign. Unfortunately, I did find a pretty serious problem here. I noticed we had some dirt coming out from under the machine, and what I found is that the belly pan is completely rotted away. I can actually put my hand up right into the drive system. There is nothing left of this pan. So let's flip this up in the service position. We'll get these bolts out and just see how bad the pan is, as well as the internals of the drive system. Yeah, that pan is completely shot. So I would say we need a new one of those. I think my bigger concern is just the internals of the drive system, if they still work. I did pull the lever, the wheel's engaged, so we might be okay. I guess the question is, does that speed selector still move? And it's actually disconnected right now from the controls up there, so let me just try to actuate it. And surprisingly, it moves just fine. So in that sense, I think we got lucky. Anyway, let's try to get these bolts out so we can pull off what's left of this pan. Yeah, it's pretty bad. And I would say caused for sure by a mouse. We have signs of a mouse house. We even got an acorn right there and some other debris. Well, actually, that's part of the pan right there. So, yeah, unfortunately, a mouse did this pan in. So we definitely need a new one of those. Now, as far as the rest of it goes, it's not terrible. You know, I think this chain got the worst of it. There might be a stuck link, actually. I don't think it is any stuck links. Let's just rotate it. Yeah, it actually moves fine. So I think, you know, the chains will be usable. They definitely need to be lubed up a bit. So I'm going to take a second, just get this loose debris out. You know, luckily the rest of it is still solid. It was really the pan that took the brunt of it. So yeah, hopefully that part is still available. This machine is about 20 years old, so I think that is going to be a tough part to find. Yeah, on closer look, I would say this chain does need to be replaced. I can see we have some stuck links. And yeah, I mean, could they be freed up? Possibly. But this chain has taken a lot of corrosion. The other chains, though, actually are very good. You know, I don't think there's going to be any issues keeping those on there. So I did just take a quick look online for a new belly pan and came up empty. Seems to be a discontinued part. So for now, I'm just going to turn my attention to the engine, get it to 100%, we'll get it fully assembled, and then we'll turn our attention to the rest of this machine and figure out what we're going to do. It's pretty much perfect. Maybe a touch over, but close enough. All right, let's get these zip ties out of the way. And to get this carburetor off, it's pretty easy. There's just two screws right there holding it on. So the fuel valve is turned off. So let's loosen those up. We'll get the carb free. And as far as the line goes, I think I'm just going to cut it. It is fairly petrified. The fuel valve is shut off, so if it works, we shouldn't leak too much. Yeah, that fuel looks pretty bad. I'm not sure why it's so dark. You know, if there's potentially two-stroke oil in there or just something else. Anyway, there is some debris, a bit of water. I'm pretty surprised the engine was running at all on that stuff. Anyway, the tank is empty and it is dry. So I've made up a new fuel line with a new fuel valve. So let's get the old one disconnected. I'm going to cut it right there and then hopefully use the old line to pull the new one through. That was on there pretty loose. So we'll just cut it right there. And this fuel line, it actually runs kind of between the flywheel and the engine block. So it's a bit challenging sometimes to put a new line in there. So I'm going to use the barbed fitting to kind of connect these two together and hopefully pull through the new one while at the same time pulling the old one out. There we go. A little bit of WD-40 makes it a lot easier to get these lines installed. And especially when pushing this onto plastic, you don't want to exert too much force. You're going to end up breaking that tank and you'll have to buy a new one. So I think we'll just start by getting the fuel line off, and definitely needed to be replaced. There is a crack in the line right there. So we'll get that out of the way. This right here is just for actuating the choke. This sticks through and has the knob on it, so we got 2 Phillips screws right there to remove. Those are on there pretty tight. Looks like someone used a red thread locker, which I'm not really sure why. I think blue would be a little bit more appropriate. And we lost a bunch of fuel as well. This bowl has this little button you just hold down, and I accidentally hit it. That just lets the fuel out, so if you have a little water in there, you can drain it without taking the carb apart. Or if you're going to store it, you can store it dry just by doing that. And yeah, it's amazing. Actually, it was running on that fuel. Looks a lot worse in the cup than it did peeking down in the tank. So let's get that bowl off and see what surprises are in there. Like the Briggs, the bowl nut, it's also the main jet. So a lot of times you can get away with just cleaning that to get things up and running again. And surprisingly, it looks really good inside of here. So I did not expect to see that. But I'm not complaining. Anyway, we'll finish getting it apart. We'll clean it up. At least, the outside needs some help. It looks like there might be a pilot needle right in there. And it might also have a cap on it. Kind of hard to tell. There's a lot of junk in there. Let me see if I can get that out. All right, there we go. Let's turn it in. See where it's set at right now. And it doesn't turn in, so it's not a needle, it's actually a jet. You know what, actually, I'm going to put that back, and I'm going to spray some carb cleaner just in this area. I don't want any of that dirt to fall in and clog up any of the passages. That's pretty much it. There is a removable emulsion tube. I'm tempted to leave good enough alone. It is made out of plastic, and they do tend to crack. There's also a couple O-rings in there as well. So if you're going to take it out, replace the O-rings. In this case, I think I'm going to leave good enough alone. And don't forget this little passage right there on the side. Ah. I was wondering what all the bubbles were about. It looks like the cleaner is having a bad reaction with the aluminum. Usually that doesn't happen. This stuff is pretty safe, but in this case, yeah, not so safe. So I'm just going to use some carb spray, clean it the best I can. But I'd say the ultrasonic in this case is not doing any good here. All right, let's try this again. The metal turned pretty dark. It was only in there for 5 minutes, and there was quite a flow of bubbles coming from the carburetor. And at first I thought nothing of it, and in hindsight, I'd say that was a chemical reaction, and it was pretty aggressively attacking this metal. I'm not sure exactly what it is. I assumed it was aluminum, but now I'm not sure, because usually that doesn't happen. Anyway, I'm going to try this again. This time just hot water and some dish soap. It takes a lot longer, but it's also a lot safer. So in this case, we'll go for safe. It cleaned up pretty well. Not that it was that bad to begin with. It was really just all the dirt and sludge on the outside. So that is gone. And it looks like the dish soap and water lightened up the material again a bit. Not quite as good as it was before. Anyway, I don't think there's going to be any permanent damage. I guess we'll find out in a minute how well it runs the engine. Yeah, that float level is not correct. You see how it's not level with the body of the carb? That's where it should be, and that's where it is. So we do need to bend the tab up a little bit. Thankfully this does have a metal tab, which is adjustable. So we'll get the pin out. Get that needle out of there. And that's the metal tab right there. You can see it is bent down quite a bit. So we'll just bend that back a little. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So we get the bowl on. This flat part right here aligns with that. So just be sure to do that, or else the float will be obstructed. I'm just going to leave this without any Loctite. The old stuff is still on there. It does provide some interference, and I don't think this would have had Loctite on it from the factory. I think worst case, if these shake loose, they're going to fall. They're not going to get sucked into the engine. And then we have the jet on the side here. Let's try it out. So getting these on can be a little bit tricky. You got to do it in the right order, starting with the linkage for the throttle, and then connecting the fuel line, and finally securing the carb to the intake manifold. Yeah, linkages move fine. I think I'm going to put the blower housing on this time so we can actually attach the throttle control, which goes on the side of the blower housing. And yeah, maybe just hold off putting this piece on until we test it out. So we'll disconnect the temporary kill wire and put the proper one back. You know, the carb could have been cleaned with the blower housing on. I think this was only off because of the spark issue. Anyway, that's really loose fitting on there. So I'm just going to crimp that down a bit and try it again. That's better. So this is the plate here I want to reconnect. It's going to accomplish a couple things, actually. Besides throttle control, we're also going to gain the ability to shut the engine off. It actually picks up the ground through these bolt holes. So when you put this lever all the way down into the off position, it'll ground out the coil. But now that we're here, I can see an oversight on my part. These lines, I think, are in the way. I'm pretty sure the rod that's connected over to the governor arm is supposed to come across above these lines. So let me see if I can disconnect it and reconnect it. Otherwise, I think I might have to backtrack a bit here. Yeah, I need to disconnect these lines. So not a big deal. I guess the only downside is that I did already add some fuel to the tank, so we're going to spill a little more fuel. But the valve is off, so let's get that fuel line disconnected so we can connect everything up the way it should be. And last but not least, I want to connect this linkage right here. This is for the auger control. Assuming we get it started, which I think it will, I want to fully test all the functions of this machine. Make sure the auger engages, that it goes forward and backward, and that we don't have any other major mechanical issues. And I'm assuming this washer and pin go here. They were in the box of parts. And I've been able to identify where most of the parts go. But I still have one bolt I haven't figured out yet. Anyway, I think we're ready for contact. All right, let's give this a try. The fuel valve is turned on. Choke's on. We'll bring it up so it's not killing spark, but we're still in the idle position. I'm going to skip the primer for now. Well, what can I say? I mean, it looks terrible, but mechanically, it's 100%. It moves forward, it moves backward, the augers engage without issue, and it started first pull. Really, the only issue I found is that the throttle was not that responsive, and now that it's off, I can kind of see what's going on here. This linkage should move freely, and right now it just bound up. It's not returning to where it should be. So the issue here is actually the rod that connects over to the governor. It looks like someone might have bent it, and because of that, that rod right there is making contact with the exhaust as well as the intake manifold. So I'm going to let this cool down. We'll bend that rod down a bit and try this again. All right, I think we're cooled down enough. There we go. Let's try this again. I've got you in there real close so you can kind of see the linkage and how it's working. Hopefully not too close. The camera stabilization goes a little nuts, but let's give it a try. Yeah, that did it. We now have good throttle response. So mechanically, it would seem like we are 100%. I guess to know for sure, we'd have to put it to work in some snow, but we don't have any yet. So that is a TBD. Now that just means we have to deal with the rest of the machine. I think the most serious issue here is the belly pan. That is not an optional component. I need to source one of those or make one of those. And assuming we get by that hurdle, there are some miscellaneous things we need. I notice we're missing a bolt right there. One of the tires doesn't hold air, and we're missing a lens right there. And I'm sure there's going to be some other things we find along the way. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, which is the paint. To restore this properly, this whole thing should be stripped down, sanded, and painted up. And I'm kind of on the fence on that. That is a big investment in time. This is a 20-year-old machine that spent, unfortunately, most of its life outside. So yeah, that one, I'm going to have to give some thought. But for now, let's figure out what to do with that pan. So a couple parts are starting to trickle in. I've got a used headlight to replace the blown out one right there. And I think more importantly, I have a belly pan. It's a used part. It's the only one I could find, and it's not exactly the right one. It does have a different part number, but from what I can tell, the only difference is the color of the pan and not the pan itself. So I'm going to stand this back up. We'll get this out. We'll see if it's going to fit, and of course we'll have to paint it if it does. And while it's up in the air, we'll take a closer look at what we need to do to swap out that light. So I have not tried to fit this yet, but I'm fairly confident it'll fit. When looking at the parts diagram for this machine, I saw alternative parts listed. The only difference were the last 4 digits, and those were based on paint color. And this one happened to be one of those parts. You know, I found it on eBay. Obviously, this is a used part. We do have rust, so it's going to have to be sanded and painted. But I think it's an exact match. I mean, all the bolt holes line up. Everything seems to fit the way that it should. So we got pretty lucky, I think, with this one. And while we're here, I think I'm going to spray some PB Blaster on this chain, see if we can't free up that stuck link. From what I can tell, this is just a number 41 chain, which I have for my go-kart, so there's no reason why we can't use this. I guess my initial concern was that, you know, I thought maybe this had O-rings. They do make O-ring chain, which seals the chain better so that you don't get water where you shouldn't have water and cause these links to freeze. In this case, I don't think this is O-ring chain, so something like this should work just fine. But, you know, if we can free this up, it'll probably be okay. I mean, this is a low-speed application. You know, once it's freed up, we can add some grease, and most likely it'll be fine. And I'm going to add a little bit of protection here to keep the PB Blaster away from this friction disc. You don't want to get any oil on there, or else the drive wheels will slip and not engage properly. So this link right here is the only one that's frozen. So I'm going to try to brush some of that rust off of there. We'll blast it real good with the PB Blaster and see if we can't free it up. I think it just moved a bit. Yeah, it's moving a tiny bit. Yeah, it's not really freeing up. So, I don't see a master link on this. So I think I'm just going to maybe try to cut this old one off. The chain I have as a replacement does have a master link. So reinstalling shouldn't be too difficult. Yeah, we had more issues than just one link. These two are pretty frozen up. Got another one right there, and there, and, oh, kind of there. Yeah, so there's quite a few links. I think this was the worst right here. This one, even with a lot of force, doesn't move. So we just need to cut a new piece that is that length. So I'm going to use this chain right here. And let's see here. So we need to drive that pin out right there. I have a master link, which is going to connect this end back to that. So we'll give this a try. We'll just support the link, but allow enough space for the pin to go through. There we go. This is the master link right here. It just goes in on either side. And that piece goes like that. Then you have this piece, which just slides in place to lock it in. And usually you face it so that the open part is kind of opposite the travel of direction. In this case, it's low speed, so I'm not sure it's really going to matter. But the normal direction of rotation is this way. So with that in mind, I will put it on like that. And we just need a pair of pliers to squeeze that on to lock it in place. Just like that. So everything in here does need to be greased. I actually don't have low temp grease. That is on order, so we'll come back and handle that in a bit. So we'll just test it real quick. It rotates much better. No binding like it was before. So that is a light right there we need to swap out. And I had assumed it was going to be a pretty easy process. But we have virtually no access. I mean, even if the light bulb burned out, I'm not sure how anyone would get that out to actually swap out that bulb. So there must be something I'm missing here as far as how to get that out. I guess we can take a look at the new one. That might give us a little bit of insight as far as how, it's held onto the machine. Not sure. There is a wire here, which I don't see how that would hold it to the machine. So, yeah, I'm going to have to maybe do a little bit of homework. I don't want to tear apart the whole thing just to find out that there was an easier way to do that. Anyway, I think before I even do that, let's just hook this up to some power, make sure that it works properly. We don't want to install it and find out that it's junk. All right, so we'll try this out real quick. We'll connect the green to negative, and I mean, technically it's a light bulb, so you can connect it either way. It's just a resistive load. And we'll connect this lead to battery positive. When I touch it to here, we should get light. And we don't. So either the light bulb's bad, maybe the harness is bad, or maybe these leads are bad. Let's just double check the leads, make sure we were getting power down to where we should. Yep, test leads are good, 13 volts. So the issue isn't there. Let's just check the resistance of the light bulb. It should be something other than 0. And we're at 0. Or I should say open. So most likely we have a bad light bulb. Luckily the one on the machine still works. So we're going to have to swap that out. Anyway, let's just try pulling on the one that's in the machine right now, see if it just pops out. Maybe it'll be that easy. All right, so to get this in, the best I can tell is that this wire needs to go down between this piece of metal and the plastic front here. So I'm going to attach the light, and I'll use one hand to guide it in on the front. And on the back side, I'm going to be holding this wire, guiding it to where it needs to be. So I'm kind of focused in here on the back of the machine where the light is. This is the one we just installed. That's the other one. You can see the metal clip right there, how it's folded down. And it's actually not this part of the clip that holds it in. It's those little metal tabs on either side, which is what keeps the light in place. So not too bad, I guess, once you know how it works. So I've got a few different reds already in stock from other projects. So this one is a Troy-Bilt red, which I assumed would be the best match. I guess I'm a little undecided. I took the Troy-Bilt red, the Sunrise red, and this one is just a red enamel, and sprayed a little bit of each on this piece of scrap. The top one is the Troy-Bilt red, and it does match pretty well. You know, it's not perfect, but it's very close. The Sunrise red is actually one of my favorites and seems pretty close as well, but I think the Troy-Bilt is closer. And then this other red down here is just not a match. So I'm thinking we are going to stick with the Troy-Bilt red, this can right here. So let's sand up the belly pan. We'll get some primer on there and put some paint on it. See if we can't get this label off since it's not the right model number for this machine. So by heating it up, it's gonna loosen up the glue and theoretically should allow this to peel off. So it's been a couple days, and the rest of the parts have come in. So we're going to start with this wheel. We'll just get a tube in it. Fortunately, this pin seems to be rusted in place, so yeah, I might have to cut it off. Okay. This one's on there. Holy cow. This one is proving to be a real challenge. The tire is fairly petrified, so it's not coming off very easily, and this rim is actually fairly soft. I started to bend it a little with the other tool trying to get this off, so hopefully the tire spoons will have a little bit better success. I mean, we only need to get this outer bead off to slip the new tube in. I was going to say we're in. We're not quite. There we go. Yeah, we're in. It's just so petrified. So we're going to have to break the bead on the other side in order to get that tube in. So the real trick here is going to be getting this tire back on the rim without puncturing the tube. You know, the kit I bought did come with 2 tubes, so I guess worst case we'll have 2 tries at this. And that tool is just going to keep that valve from falling back in. And it's going to keep the tube in approximately the right spot. So once I get it fully over the rim, I'm going to put a little bit of air in the tube. That should help it stay in position, and it'll be a little bit less likely to pinch. So we're pretty lucky that the wheel wasn't frozen on there. That is a very common problem. So I'm just going to grease up this axle before putting it back on. And I'll probably pull the other wheel off too if it's not already stuck, and just grease it up. That should prevent it from seizing. Well, I know some of you are going to be a little bit disappointed that I'm not painting the whole thing here. And I was on the fence, really, if I wanted to paint it at all. And I was on Facebook Marketplace the other day, and I saw another snowblower just like this one. It was actually, I think, the next model down. That one was in perfect condition, had no run issues, had absolutely no rust. And the person was giving it away for free. So yeah, the snowblower market, it's pretty weak. You know, the last few years, we haven't really had any good storms. So I think the demand is pretty low. And I've already spent, I think, about $100 in parts, you know, between the light, this pan, the tube, and some other miscellaneous parts. So yeah, I'm not going to make this one perfect, but I do have about 1.5 cans of paint, that Troy-Bilt paint. And I think it's enough to do the bucket. The bucket is by far in the worst condition, so we'll use that paint there and try to make it a little bit more presentable. And last but not least, we got a carriage bolt. It's a 1 inch, I believe it's 5/16 diameter. And this is not the OEM part. The OEM part was available for about $20 when you factor in shipping, tax, and then the price of the washer, the bolt, and the nut. So instead I went to the local hardware store and spent 75 cents. It should be good enough. We don't want it tight because then this chute won't move. So right now it's in there, about a turn away from tight. Let's just test it, make sure it still moves. We're good. And one of the most important things here is to put the model and serial number back on the machine because it was on the old pan. And without that information, if anybody wants to repair this or order any parts in the future, you need to know that information. So I guess we'll start just by putting the model sticker on. I'm going to start just by pulling this cover off. There's one bolt on each side. This will provide access to the belts. So when we split the snowblower, we're going to have to get the belts off the pulley on the engine side in order for it to come apart. So once we get these bolts out, we then just have 3 on each side, and that should be it. And there's also a pin right here. We need to pull that because this support is on the bucket side. So this has to be free in order for that bucket to slide out. I might as well pull these bolts while we're here to get the chute completely uninstalled because there are cables connecting it, and we're going to need this off anyway to put the paint on. Might as well keep going. We got a couple bolts right there, 1 on the side, 2 on top, and this will allow that chute to come out. Then we'll get these 3 off, and then I'm going to support the engine side with the hoist. We'll pull the other 3 off, and we should be ready to pull them apart. These things always look pretty odd when they're split like this. Anyway, it's not self-supporting, so it's just going to stay happily right where it is until we're done cleaning up this bucket. So before I can start kind of sanding and preparing the surface, I do need to do a few more things. I need to get the shoes off on each side, and I want to try to get that pulley off, because if I can get that off, then I can remove the bolts from the side, each side, and the entire auger assembly will pull right out. So what do you suppose the odds are that this is going to come out? Wow. I'm impressed. Came right out. Wow, that was really loose. I was expecting some sort of resistance. Kind of surprised actually at how easily this came apart, especially that pulley. That split design was kind of nice. Those pulleys can really put up a fight, but not this one. Anyway, now kind of begins the long process here of cleaning this thing up. I'm going to go over the whole thing with a scraper, get all the loose paint off. I'll go back over it with a wire wheel and eventually move on to sanding, priming, and painting. So I'm not going to show you the entire process. Actually, I'm not going to show you a lot of it, but I'll kind of show you the highlights as I go. Anyway, I think before I do this, I'm going to spend a second over here. I want to clean up the engine block now that we have some really good access. And this machine also came with a new set of belts. So we've got two here for the auger drive, and then of course the drive system as well. So I'm thinking, let's just pull this belt now. We'll get that new belt installed, maybe clean some of this junk up, and move on to the fun part. So far, I'm kind of liking the design of this snowblower. Fairly easy to service compared to the last few. it's a slow process. But the scraper, it is taking off quite a bit. I mean, this is about maybe 15, possibly 20 minutes of scraping, and just a ton of paint flaking right off. In total, I spent about 10 days on this from start to finish, at least in duration, not necessarily effort, but a ton of time to redo this bucket. And if you don't look too close, it almost looks like it was cared for. Anyway, I double checked all the bearings. Everything had 0 wear, so this definitely has not seen a lot of use. I greased everything up. Everything's been put back on the bucket that belongs, and we even have the new belts ready to go. So let's get this bucket reinstalled. So before I can get this bucket fully on the machine here, I do need to reattach this spring. This is what tensions the belt to engage the auger. And if I remember right, it goes kind of between the bucket and the belts right here. There is a hole which is not a lot of slack, so it might be better to maybe fold the belts down, pull the bucket a little bit more towards the spring, and get this where it belongs. Yep, like that. So now that we have the belts on, we got the spring connected. Just need to guide this in. And we're in. So I put one nut in already on the other side just to hold it in place while we tighten down this one. I've already cleaned a lot of the dirt off this machine, but I missed the intake manifold, so we'll clean that up real quick while we still have access. And for the chute control, it's just this pin that we have to pull out. And we have 2 washers here, so I'm thinking one probably goes on that side, and the other one on this side. And then we just put the pin back and try it out. Perfect. You remember way back in the beginning I said I had an extra bolt, didn't know where it went. Well, it's now become clear. We have the oil dipstick tube with a bracket right here that's not connected to anything. And this surround we just installed also has a bolt hole right here. So if we line this up properly, this one last bolt will hold the tube and that tin in place. Last but not least, we got this plastic cover. And the best I can tell is that it goes on these 3 studs, just like this. I think the real difficult part here is just going to be lining it up. I did have to take the choke knob back off. And once we're started on the studs, we should be good to go. So I think we're all lined up. We're okay down there, and the hold up right now is the plug for the electric start. And there we go. Pretty much ready to go. Just one minor detail, and that's the fact that it's actually late October and a nice day to boot. So yeah, it's going to be a while, I think, before I get to try this thing out. So I'm going to roll it into the corner, and with any luck, when I turn this back on, there'll be some snow to plow. So it's been a few months, and we just got our first appreciable snowfall. Now, unfortunately, it's been switching back and forth between snow and rain for the last few hours. So that snow is packed with water, and really a snowblower's worst nightmare. They don't do very good. They tend to clog up quite a bit. So although it's still snowing, I think I'm going to get off what I can before it switches again to rain. Overall, this thing did a really good job. It had no issues blowing this heavy snow. You know, most blowers would have clogged up. This one did not clog up a single time. Anyway, I was about to say it's absolutely perfect. I don't need to do anything to it, but I did discover two issues. I guess the first one was just an oversight on my part. You know, early on in this project, I thought it had a key, which most snowblowers do. And when putting it back together, I didn't see that key in the box, so I just omitted it. And quite honestly, that's something I never use. Well, anyway, I was blowing the snow, and I looked down at one point, and I saw this green wire dangling with the key in it. So, yeah, not a big deal. Thankfully, the bolt is still there. You know, unfortunately, I do need to take this side cover off to get that installed properly. And that is something I have to do anyway, because the second problem is the throttle again. I throttled it down, but the engine speed didn't change. So that governor rod linkage, it is hanging up again. You know, but otherwise, it's working quite well. And I actually had to take the gloves off because these get really hot. I've never had a snowblower with heated grips. That is a really nice feature. Anyway, you know, for the most part, I would say this is done. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.